Welcome back to Borderlines, the only show that takes you beyond borders. My guest is one of those people, I get those guests, and you all know, like, there are guests that you think, God, I really want him on the show. I want his opinion. I've seen him being interviewed. He's been so frank and unapologetic, and you're like, he belongs on Borderlines. Well, he's one of those people. He's an author, he's a journalist, and he's Scottish. The Scots don't mess. They have not got time for any kind of nonsense. But we only get, 55 minutes with him. So I'm not even going to go into a long, drawn out introduction, but his name is John Wight, and he's the author of Gaza, the Bleeding Land. John, welcome to Borderlines, Nigeria, Lagos, and everywhere else.
It's my absolute pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
It's our pleasure to have you. Look, I've got to ask you, what are your thoughts immediately? The Americans couldn't understand the language of the Scots. Trump was in your hood recently. What was going through your head? What were people saying?
It was the good, the bad, the ugly. The good was obviously that there's been some movement with regards to Gaza after his meeting with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer at long last, whereby he's talking about getting food into these long-suffering people and alleviating the horror that they're experiencing at the hands of Netanyahu and his Zionist clique, with the backing of the West up to this juncture, it must be said. But he came over to Scotland like the potentate he aspires to be. Quite remarkable to see a sitting US president visiting his own golf club in Scotland, and the UK Prime Minister visiting him as if he was a guest in his own country. And this is the dynamic that we are living through in these times. And I draw clear parallels between the declining American empire, which is manifested in the decline of the standard of presidents, and the decline of Rome in ancient times. And as Karl Marx once said, history repeats. The first time is tragedy, the second time is farce. And we're going through the tragedy of the late Roman Empire in its declining years, which, as you'll know, being a learned person yourself, no empire leaves the stage of history without a struggle. And what we're witnessing now in Ukraine and in Gaza, and all the turbulence that has become the norm in our world, is the result of this declining American empire as it heads for the dustbin of history. So the rest of the world has a challenge to manage this process. But so many people are suffering in consequences, I just said, Gaza especially. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that in detail going forward.
Absolutely. Before we even get into Gaza, you wrote, an article, an essay on Medium, which I think I read it last year, which was about Yahya Sinwar after he was killed by Israel. And you compared him on your Twitter to William Wallace. Explain that. And I saw that quite a few people couldn't understand the comparison. So I'd like you to explain that.
Well, if you think, I believe that history is very, very important for us as a guide and as a way to understand the present and to weigh up the consequences and the significance of the past. William Wallace was a terrorist in his time. He was Yahya Sinwar of Scotland vis-a-vis England. Obviously the word terrorism didn't come into English usage until the French Revolution, 1789. But there were other words that were used that meant the same thing: brigand, bandit, savage. William Wallace was one of those, as was Sitting Bull Crazy Horse, as was Che Guevara. All the heroes of our time, those who stand up against power, against colonialism, against empire, they're painted by the powerful as terrorists because what they represent is a real threat to their power in any given space and time. So William Wallace is now a romanticised figure. Obviously, the Braveheart film. There was another film made, The Outlaw King, that appeared on Netflix, which I would advise your viewers and listeners to watch. It's much more authentic. But he's a romantic figure now. But he wasn't a romantic figure in the eyes of the English when they were in occupying power. And on that theme, we have to take in hand the parallels between Israel, the state of Israel, and other ethno-supremacist projects that have littered our history. Sparta, the city-states, vis-a-vis the Helots that were condemned to serve the Spartans on pain of death in the days of ancient Greece. The US Confederacy, white Rhodesia, apartheid South Africa, they all belong in the same spectrum. And of course, the most glaring example of this was Nazi Germany. And I put it to you that Zionism and Nazism are ideological twins. Both are species of white supremacy, both are genocidal in intent, and both represent an inversion of the human experience and the human condition.
In your book, Gaza, the Bleeding Land, you tell a story, two parallel lives, a young Palestinian child, and then the young Israeli, or should I say Jewish child from New York, and you bring them together. And you talk about how each of them are shaped with violence in their own individual ways. Was the young Palestinian child based on Yahya Sinwar, or just any Palestinian child?
Oh, it was a generic character. I wrote this book before these awful events of Gaza. The book set in 2014, Operation Protective Edge, which was a previous Israeli land, sea, and air assault on the Gaza Strip. Nothing like, obviously, what we're seeing now. And it just seemed to me, I've been immersed in this issue for many years now, 3 decades. It's always been central to my understanding of the world and my conception of what constitutes justice and progress and what does not. And it just struck me that there's never been a work in the English language and literature, and if I can be so conceited, is to describe the book as a work of literature that's dealt with this issue of world historical importance. And I think that's been a travesty. I think there are reasons for it. First of all, the power of the Zionist lobby. I know in my own experience, when I started submitting the book to various publishers, I got really good feedback, but I got told in sotto voce fashion that they couldn't even deal with this material, because what I do in the book is not only do I humanize a Palestinian in Gaza, I humanize a member of the Palestinian resistance. You know, we're used to hearing members of Hamas just dismissed as fungible, terrorists. They have no backstory, they have no lives, they have no hopes and dreams and fears. They have no series of experiences that brought them to the point of raising the gun against their oppressor. And I wanted to redress that. But interestingly, drilling deeper, I found the Israeli / Zionist character of Gabriel easier to write in the process, purely because I come from the same culture as him, westernized. The same cultural references. I spent 7-8 years of my life living in the States, so I know the landscape very well. And despite not sharing his political views, I had to really be as objective as possible to make the book work, to get that juxtaposition between the Zionist argument and the argument of the Palestinian as to who has the just claim to the land and the just claim to being considered the victims and who is the perpetrator. And I'm delighted to say it's been well received. I couldn't interfere in the writing and give away where my sympathies lie, or it wouldn't work. So I'm glad you mentioned the book. I'm as I say, I'm very gratified that people are noticing the book, and it's starting to gain some traction in the global south, which is very important to me.
I mean, there was no way I could mention the book, because even though, we don't get to buy it here, I have to get the soft copy because these things don't make it to Nigeria or indeed, this part of Africa. I thought what you did, like you said, humanizing these two characters informs or reminds us that when leaders make terrible, genocidal decisions, the next generation are the ones that suffer. And
100%.
and where do we go from there? So let's talk about this. Of course you couldn't express, like you said, you couldn't express where you stood, but now I hope you can. Let's talk about what I'm calling Operation Genocide, because I think we've matured enough not to call it a war anymore. We know enough. We know it is not a war. It is not asymmetrical. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's been a real learning curve for me, and I'm sure for many people, watching this unfold in a time when we're taught that Western and civilized belong in the same sentence as words. We don't live in a civilized world. We live in barbarism masquerading as civilization. Our world is not underpinned by international law, democracy, or humanitarianism. It's underpinned by a hierarchy of human worth based on race, culture, religion, history and military strength, and that has been laid bare since October the 7th, 2023. Hamas is not a terrorist organization. Hamas is a Palestinian national liberation organization with Islamic characteristics. October 7th, 2023 was not a terrorist attack. It was a desperate and audacious act of resistance in the teeth of decades of structural oppression. And here's the thing, no ugly oppression has ever given rise to a pretty resistance. If you don't like the resistance, don't do the oppression. Were there atrocities committed? Of course. Atrocities are committed in every single conflict by every single army. The conflict is the real atrocity, and we have to take in hand the reasons and the whys and wherefores of conflicts, which is a product of colonialism, oppression, and settler colonialism. Israel is a white European settler colonial project and has been from inception. I think we will be living with the consequences of Gaza, this genocide, for generations to come. At the outset, when Netanyahu, with gleeful abandon, talked about Amalek, he was referencing the old biblical story about the ancient Hebrews and the Amalek who were exterminated as a condition of their God-given name, the land, the promised land. He signaled to his own people and to the world that this was going to be a war of extermination. This is demonic, it's satanic. I don't think Israel will last. As I say, every other ethno-supremacist project that we have borne witness to in human affairs has not lasted because they're unsustainable by conception, because they require the willful abandonment of a subject people's right to resist and to stand up for their dignity and their freedom, which is innate in all of us, regardless of where you're from or where you've been in this world.
Indeed. What informs the othering, though? Because, like you said, there's been others. We've seen, other subjugations and occupations and etc. But when it comes to Palestine, I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, the othering seems to be even more intense. What informs that? What informs that resentment, that dehumanization, that refusal to see that, this is a people who also deserve to be whatever it is they want to be, either good, bad, or ugly, because like the rest of us, right? What is it?
Well, it's because of the nature of Israel and its inception, as I say. 1917, the Balfour Declaration, where the British government of the day, which was the owner of the land, if I may use that word, in the wake of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire vis-a-vis World War I, they wanted to deal with their migrant crisis by giving the Jewish migrants, they were lapping up on British shores from Eastern Europe, fleeing Tsarist oppression, where anti-Semitic pogroms were a regular occurrence. And so that was their Rwanda program. That was their Rwanda deal, much more concretized, much more effective. The Balfour Declaration is at once a document of expulsion and anti-Semitism. Arthur Balfour, who authored the document and gave it his name, he was the British Foreign Secretary, he was an anti-Semite. The British elites didn't want Jewish migrants coming from Eastern Europe with their alien ways, alien culture, alien language, etc. And so Palestine was a convenient way to get rid of that migrant problem, whilst at the same time creating what they would think a loyal British colony to help them look after India, which was the jewel in the British colonial crown. And even the governor of Jerusalem, the British governor of Jerusalem during the Palestine Mandate era, Ronald Storrs, infamously said that Israel will be our loyal little Ulster in the Middle East. It will play the same role as Ulster plays in Ireland, which will be to keep the indigenous people down and in check in order to better control them and control their land and resources. So the Palestinian people who were left after the Nakba of 1946 and 7, they are a cuckoo in the nest. Benny Morris is one of the new historians of the Zionist state. Ilan Pappé is another one. Benny Morris is on the side of the Zionist state. Ilan Pappé is a great man, an Israeli historian who's against Israel and Zionism and everything that it has brought into being. But Benny Morris was honest. He said the problem we have is the founding fathers of Israel failed to finish the job vis-a-vis the Nakba. They expelled 750,000 people from their land under the rubric of Plan Delect, and they raised 550 villages, and they were replaced by Zionist stroke Jewish settlements and towns. But they left too many, and that, what they would call rump of Palestinian resistance to their pure settler colonial utopia, is an inconvenient truth. And that is why the Palestinians who still remain on that land are being punished and punished so awfully and for such a long period of time, because they represent an inconvenient truth that Israel is not a liberal democracy, is not a country that wants peace, it's not a sanctuary for Jewish people. It's about might is right, and it's a replication of the Western colonial powers and their attitude to the world going back to the 19th century.
John, you've warned in the past that neutrality in times of genocide is complicity. As a historian, do you believe it is possible or even ethical? And I get asked this question. In actual fact, I was still told that this morning, excuse me, that objectivity, is it possible to remain objective when confronted with, the deliberate destruction of a people? You're a journalist, I'm a journalist. We're at that crossroads. Do you think so?
The only place you'll find objectivity in human affairs is in the morgue. If you're a living, breathing, sentient being, then you cannot be objective in human affairs, especially when it comes to such an enormous event such as Gaza. You can have an objective view of what's happening, but you draw a subjective conclusion as to why it's happening. And depending on where you sit, we'll go back to the book. Gabriel and Omar, the two characters, who the antagonists in the book, Gaza, This Bleeding Land, they come from they're on the same land. They're opponents. They have a different view of that situation, looking at it from a different angle. How can you ever accept or justify or try in any way objectify what's going on in Gaza right now? If you do, you're a monster in human form, because you are engaging in one of the worst things a human being can do. And that is justifying the mad slaughter of thousands and thousands of children, babies we're talking here. Babies. They're not terrorists. They're not resistance fighters. They're babies. And they're being wantonly and deliberately slaughtered as part, as I mentioned before, of Netanyahu and the Zionist state's war of extermination against the Palestinians in Gaza.
A friend of mine said to me, so we've had this whole course correct, what I call course correct, where, those who were saying Israel has a right to defend itself have suddenly gone looking for their conscience in the bin where they left it and picking it back up and trying to stick it back to themselves. Now, we have Keir Starmer saying we will recognize Palestine if the Palestinian state would do. France, we will recognize. Tell me something. First of all, the question is in two ways. Who are they to recognize anybody? I mean, who are they to recognize a country, a state, a people that existed without them, before them? And why wait till September?
Well, that's the colonial minds that continue to predominate our politics in the West. The empire may have gone, but the empire state of mind has not gone. Frantz Fanon wrote a lot about this. Great hero of mine, who was a chronicler, as you'll know, of the Algerian War of Independence against the French. And he said, imperialism leaves germs of rot which we must clean from our land and also our mind. And these are colonial, imperialist-minded reprobates who rule over us. And it's almost like, as I say, the right of the Palestinian people to national liberation is inalienable. It's the right of every people. You come from a part of the world ravaged by hundreds of years of colonialism, and indeed, in many ways, you're still recovering from that history, that malign history. Who is Keir Starmer to treat the nationhood of an indigenous, and I want to emphasise the word indigenous people, the gift in his eyes of recognition of statehood? But we're beyond that now. The Palestinians don't need to be recognised. We're at a stage, in my strong view, where we need to be focused on the legitimization of Israel in order that the Palestinians might just live, never mind be recognised. They're fighting for their very survival and the survival of their families and future generations. This war is so significant in this respect, and it is. I find it unbearable the extent to which the Arab world has failed to meet its obligations and come into the aid of the Palestinians, with few exceptions. The Houthis in Yemen, of course, various Shia militia groups in Iraq. But where is the Arab street? I'm just bewildered at the extent where this war is being able to take place as if it's taking place in a laboratory, where the new weapons are being tested, new methods of slaughter are being tested, new methods of control are being tested in front of our eyes, and we're watching it live stream every single day. And I think that historians, hundreds of years from now, will look back at this period with the same way that we look back in horror at the role of child sacrifice during the Aztec civilization. It's that bad. And I think the historians of tomorrow will level a withering indictment of us today. I say us figuratively, not we do our best, but I'm talking about the world and the power, the people who are in power, who have had an opportunity to take the world in a different direction and save not just the Palestinians, but humanity itself. Because I say that humanity, in the wider sense, is dying in Gaza, along with thousands and thousands of Palestinian people.
I want to take you back. Delegitimization of Israel. I need you to break it down for us, really, because I need my listeners to understand. In Africa, in Nigeria, yes, we have a lot of Christian Zionists who are yet to understand what Israel, today's 1948 Israel, means. That Israel that God called in the Bible, and Zionism, and why you would say Israel needs to be delegitimized.
Well, if we want to take the biblical track, it's a big question. So please.
I'm going to give you 3 minutes to teach us, educators, professor. Please.
Well, Jesus was a Palestinian. Jesus was a Palestinian Jew. And the Palestinians have a genealogical connection to that land, to the extent that the Israeli Jewish citizens today claim to have, but do not. These are Europeans. These are people of European stock and caste. It's the Palestinians of today who are the Hebrews of yesterday and the Canaanites of the day before that. That is the genealogical connection. No serious work of genealogical research since Israel came into being has found any connection on a DNA level between the settlers who came into Israel from Europe mainly and the ancient Hebrews. That has all been that's been a function of historical and religious obscurantism. When we talk about the modern state of Israel, the impetus for that was the Holocaust. And out of the gates of Auschwitz came two different conclusions. The Zionist conclusion was, this will never happen to the Jewish people again. The Jewish expansionist, universalist conclusion was, this will never happen to anybody again. And unfortunately for the Palestinians and for us and the Jewish people, the Zionist argument became hegemonic within the Jewish diaspora, and hence the impetus behind the colonization of Palestine and the modern state of Israel. Israel is an illegitimate state. It's a criminal enterprise. It is a function of the wholly wrong conclusions drawn from the Holocaust, to the extent that history has played a sick joke. Because the Israelis, the IDF, has much more in common with the Waffen-SS than it could ever have with the Jewish victims of the Waffen-SS in the Second World War. Gaza is our Warsaw Ghetto. The Warsaw Ghetto of 1943 was their Gaza. There is a continuity of victimhood that transcends culture, nationhood, ethnicity, and any other kind of human connectedness that exists. Victims share a bond that transcends all these things, and that's the arguments that I'm making in the exercise of delegitimizing the state of Israel in my work and writings.
Steve Witkoff is in immediately we were told, immediately all the West started to say they were looking at legitimizing a country, a people that existed way before they came along. President Trump sends Stephen Witkoff to see Benjamin Netanyahu. Apparently he's supposed to go and see the notorious GHF and to ensure, to witness, to confirm whether Palestinian children or indeed Palestinian people, Gazans, are actually being starved to death. Something that pretty much everybody with a heart has called genocide by starvation. What are your thoughts on the United States, where they stand, their responsibility, and the continuation of this ugliness that's actually staining the world that we live in?
Well, on the historical comparison, there is no difference morally between the guards at Auschwitz deceiving the Jewish inmates when they arrived into believing they were going for a shower before they were being gassed to death, and the modern equivalent in Gaza, luring people out to these bogus aid stations before slaughtering them by the gun. There is no moral difference in this regard. One follows on from the other. Steve Witkoff is an emissary of a Roman Emperor Tiberius, which is Donald Trump, white supremacist in chief, and Netanyahu is as King Herod. That is a comparison to make. Tiberius went crazy. He ended up living the rest of his life on the island of Capri, lost in an orgy of debauchery. Trump, we know, has been on Epstein Island. I mean, historical comparisons can go on and on and on. I believe that Israel is destroying itself ultimately when it comes to Gaza. It will never retain any kind of legitimacy in the eyes of millions of people. Consciousness has been awakened all over the world. Mass demonstrations have been won all over the world. The cause of the Palestinian people is deemed to be, rightly so, the cause of humanity in our time. And that genie will never get put back in that bottle. And the disjuncture, the chasm of understanding and sentiment between the led and the leaders on this issue all over the world has never been greater. And every Western leader, Keir Starmer is detested in the UK according to opinion polls. Macron is detested in France. Ursula von der Leyen, or Ursula von der Genocide, as I call her, she's detested throughout the EU. These people represent machine men and machine women with machine minds and machine hearts, per the words of the great Charlie Chaplin in his wonderful monologue in his classic movie, The Great Dictator. These people are monsters in human form. And I believe that going forward, that they will pay a heavy price among their own people. You can now get put in prison. People have been put in prison, including friends of mine, for supporting Palestinian activism now. It's that bad. Britain has become so censorious. Starmer is authoritarian to the core of his being. And that's because they fear the public. And when you have a government that fears its own people, then that government is headed for perdition. And that's what's going to happen to these Western governments, I contend, going forward.
Jeremy Corbyn, I'm sure, which of course you know, who was vilified. I mean, turned into a monster because he was pro-Palestine. He's now obviously created his own party. In a funny way, he was called an anti-Semite. In a funny way, he's now been, vindicated.
Being rehabilitated.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Jeremy Corbyn, I've met Jeremy Corbyn, but Jeremy Corbyn is the most moderate of socialists you'll ever meet. He is a Quakerish, saintly man, and yet he struck fear in the heart of the British establishment, again exposing how innately weak it is in this period of late capitalism. And he was the subject of a campaign of demonization that became incitement to violence. We had the crazy situation where members of Britain's so-called elite parachute regiment were using a picture of Corbyn when Corbyn was leader of the opposition, leader of Her Majesty's opposition. They were using his picture as target practice when they were stationed in Afghanistan. And not one of those soldiers was sacked. They received light punishment for that. We had members of the security establishment talking about a coup on national television in the event if Corbyn got elected. And what's Corbyn's crime? You hit the nail on the head. He refuses to accept that the Palestinians should be deemed children of a lesser God. That was his crime. And now, he, as you say, he's bouncing back. His new party, already over 500,000 people have signed up to his new party. That makes it by far, that makes it the biggest party in the UK by a country mile already. And it's not even set up its structures or established its name even. So yeah, it's interesting to grasp the nettle of the enormity of what's going on in Gaza. Obviously, the suffering and the slaughter can never be understood on any grounds other than barbarism and evil. I try and hesitate before using, but that's the kind of emotive language that we are.
Please don't hesitate. Go ahead.
Well, they've ripped the flesh from the bones of the remaining parts of a world that we thought was worth living in. But what's happening is the old world is dying, the new world struggles to be born, and this is a time of monsters. But the things are happening, as I say, at the base of these Western democracies. Not people focus on the superstructure at the base. The base is crumbling. from Western democracy, because nothing makes sense anymore. The foreign policy of war or of support for war and genocide abroad sits on foundations of social and economic injustice at home. That is the dynamic that we are seeing in play. And so the people are restive. The anti-government sentiment is deeper and wider than I've ever experienced in my time in politics. And that goes right across the board. The US, France, Germany, the UK, Italy, when it comes to, and again, Gaza is a catalyst for this rising tide of anger and even rebellion that's coming to the fore in our politics. And I warn through your wonderful show, the British elites, they should be thankful for Corbyn, because Corbyn's given that anger a democratic outlet, and he's containing the anger in a legitimate way according to the structure that we live under. Because if it wasn't for Corbyn, there'd be riots in this country, and rightly so right now, over what they have fashioned, the injustices at home and the grievous and egregious genocide of an indigenous people abroad in our time.
Indeed. I mean, who could forget Palestine Action, now banned from the UK like ISIS?
Yep. Yep.
It's still hard to actually comprehend, to understand, let alone to understand. Everything you've said right now, in the hands of the wrong person, just like they did to Jeremy Corbyn, they would call you anti-Semitism. If you are pro-Palestine, you get called anti-Semitism. However, when you're pro-Palestine, are you not more pro-Semitism than anti?
Sorry, say it again. I didn't catch
Right.
that.
So every time you're pro-Palestinian, you get
Yes.
called an anti-Semite. However,
Yes.
the Palestinians are Semites too. So why is it that those who are anti-Palestine are never called anti-Semites?
Well, this is a function of power. They control the message. They control, or they did control the narrative, not so much now because of the advent of independent media, social media, but they've controlled the narrative, and a huge key to maintaining power is language. Language is the key that unlocks human consciousness. It's become the case that if you're not being derided as an anti-Semite, you're not doing enough for the Palestinians. That word and what it means is being bankrupted of all meaning because of overuse, because of being used dishonestly as it has been from the get-go. Every line of defense of the Israeli state is falling in the process of this genocide. And the Zionist lobby, we know, is very powerful. It's very influential. It owns our politics in large part. But its power is crumbling before our eyes and their eyes because of the sheer enormity of what's going on in Gaza and the fact that we can see it. Even though the Israelis do not let international journalists into Gaza and haven't done since October 7th, we can see it. And this has been a great teaching moment for millions and millions of people across the world. And it's a travesty for the Jewish people. I want to really emphasize that point. They themselves, in many ways, are victims of this horrific narrative that was spun in the wake of Auschwitz, which is they have arrogated to themselves and been gifted the right to act with impunity forever after because of what they suffered in the Holocaust. And that's the entirely wrong lesson that was learned, but it's one that informs what's going on today. And we have to grasp that net if we're going to understand how this has been able to be so prolonged without any interference or intervention. Any other country in the world would not have got away with what the Israelis are getting away with now and have got away with for far too long. And I say to you that Israel will only be stopped with armed intervention in the last analysis. Where will that come from? It doesn't look at, but look at what happened when the Iranians, that brief conflict with the Iranians, that shook Israeli society to its core. Those missiles bouncing off Tel Aviv, bouncing off Haifa, bouncing off northern Israel, that was never part of the plan. Ethno supremacy getting its arse kicked was never part of the plan. And that's what happened with the Iranians in that short conflict. And that's just a starter for 10. Israel has lost its sense of innocence and also its sense of strategic deterrence on a military level. The IDF is an army of ill-trained, ill-motivated reservists. They shoot without thinking. They are struggling to contain Hamas after almost 2 years. These men with brave hearts and sandals are still fighting. They're still in the field. And that's the great wonder of it. And you think about all the great resistance movements because as the gate, Hassan Nasrallah once said, the former leader of General Secretary of Hezbollah, when it comes down to it, technology doesn't win conflicts. It's the human factor. Who is fighting for justice? Because ethno-supremacists and colonialists will happy to kill for their privileges, but they're not happy. They're not so happy to die for them. And those young Palestinian men are writing a chapter in the annals of human history that will resonate throughout the ages.
Incredible, John. You can call back. I was just about to say I'm about to open the lines because they've been calling. 0201-277-0993, 0201-465-7190, or send a WhatsApp to 0809-597-5805, or if you're watching on YouTube, leave your comments there and we will try and put everything to Prof. Did I tell you he's a professor? What have you been learning today? No answers, please. I'm busy talking to a very smart man. Let me come to this. Hello.
Yeah, good evening, Ireti Bakare.
Good evening.
Yes, this is AY from Badagry.
Go ahead, AY. You get 30 seconds. The lines are going.
The Prof is really done good by trying to educate us, but I have one or two questions for him.
One. Go on.
Yes, and he made mention that the Zionists presently in Israel are extracts from European countries, and that they don't have, none of them has could be traced DNA if you try to do a DNA. Is he trying to say that somebody like Benjamin Netanyahu has no links to the Jewish people?
Okay, do you want to stay listening?
And to which country is he linked?
Okay.
If you can clearly clarify that.
Great question. Stay listening. Don't go away because he's going to answer you right now. Did you hear that? So, he said, are you trying to say Benjamin Netanyahu is not from Israel? And if not, where is he from? What's his name?
Mikulishke is his name, I think. Something of that order. He's from Poland.
Yeah.
He's Polish. He's Polish. He's as European as I am. He has no genealogical connection to that land. His arrival there, his ability to stay there was not a function of religion or historical right. It was a function of the gun. And if you understand, Israel's formation was a terrorist act. All these various Jewish Zionist terrorist militia groups, they produced Israel, the Haganah, the Stern Gang, the Levi. They were engaged in acts of terrorism and terror against the British state when Britain was given the mandate by the then League of Nations after the First World War, in the wake of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, which previously controlled that land. But Israel is a country that was born in terror and has been sustained on the back of the gun. Not legitimacy ever since. As I go back to what I referred to Israel as, Israel is the kind of country that Al Capone could only have dreamed of ruling. It's a mafia state, it's a gangster state. And Netanyahu himself is a revisionist Zionist. That was the current established by Vladimir Jabotinsky. And Jabotinsky was a great admirer of Mussolini and the black shirts. And so there's different currents within Zionism: liberal Zionism, revisionist Zionism. Revisionist Zionism is proto-fascist in orientation, and Benjamin Netanyahu is a fascist.
Thank you. Hold on. Hello.
Good evening, Sisi.
Good evening. Emmanuel, you get 30 seconds, not several questions. One.
Does your guest believe that the average Jewish person who is a Zionist can be reoriented? This is why I'm asking the question. There is a video I watched of which one of the Israelis went to the West Bank to steal a house of a Palestinian. And then he was asked, why are you stealing my house? And then he said, if I don't steal it, another person will come and steal it.
Yeah.
What is the opinion of your guest on that? Can I ask
Thank you.
question?
No. The lines are going. Prof, I told you they like to take over my show. If you can just hold on to that question, Prof, I'll answer another one. They like to take over my listeners. Hello.
Good evening, Ireti. This is Kenny.
Go ahead, Kenny.
Good evening, Prof. Yes, please, I'm of the opinion, please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm of the opinion that the Hamas people are actually the ones behind the genocide. Why? Because they plant themselves and seem to hide, cowardly behind women and children by using them as human shields. Correct me, please, if I'm wrong. I really...
Okay. Thank you. Prof will answer you. Thank you very much, Kenny. Right, hold on, guys. You can keep calling, but I'll come to you once Prof answers. So the first one was Emmanuel. He's basically asking about indoctrination. Do you think the average Jewish Israeli can, their mind can be changed? They can be unindoctrinated, because he saw a video of one particular Israeli who said he was stealing the Palestinian land, and the woman, it's an old video actually, the Palestinian woman confronted him and said, look, that's my land. And he said, well, if I don't take it, somebody else will. That's one. And then Kenny says she thinks Hamas is responsible for the genocide because Hamas is hiding behind innocent civilians, and she wants you to correct her if she's wrong. I'm going to give you 2 minutes, Prof, because the lines are going crazy. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, the ideological condition is a major thing in any society in terms of building and maintaining social cohesion. If you consider that young Hebrew children are taught a song in Hebrew with the lyrics "Death to the Arabs" and "Let their villages burn," then you realise the enormity of the problem that we're dealing with. They are being told that there's a real kind of marriage of convenience at the base of Israel, which is the demonic Talmudism, which is the chosen people narrative, which is the same as master race, and Zionism is its secular equivalent. And that marriage has been able to merge and bring together elements of the Jewish diaspora, the secular element, which is more modern, and also the religious element into one, as I say, marriage from hell for the Palestinians and for the region entire. We had a process of denazification after the Second World War in Germany, and there's going to have to be ultimately a process of de-Zionification in order to rehumanize these people. Because being brutally honest, Israel is not only a racist state, it's a racist society. The opinion polls come out, the vast majority of Israelis support what's going on in Gaza. They don't see any differentiation between Hamas and the civilian population. They see them as all as part of the same problem, the same threat, the same thorn in their side, and they should all be exterminated. And that's why, in large part, why Israel under Netanyahu has been able to continue the slaughter for so long. When on the question of Hamas
is responsible for the genocide because they're hiding.
Hamas is a product, not the cause of what's going on. The clock on this issue did not start on October 7th, 2023. The Palestinians have suffered and endured and experienced countless October 7ths since Israel landed in their midst with the force of a meteorite in 1948. This prolonged injustice or oppression is responsible for the resistance that's come in its wake. Resistance is a natural state of any colonized people. All across Africa, there was resistance to slavery, the resistance to Western colonialism, and it's the same in Palestine to this day. And what would we do under their condition? We do the very same thing. I like to think so. Scots did it, and we were occupied by the English. And I just make this point as well. Mm-hmm. The French resistance fighters in 1940s were derided as terrorists by an occupying power, as were the Soviet and Yugoslav partisan, as were members of the Jewish fighting underground in Warsaw Ghetto in 1943. So we must be careful that we don't allow these easy conclusions to be drawn on the back of the narrative of the powerful vis-a-vis the powerless. Hamas is a child, not the parent of this conflict. And October 7th, 2023 was a culmination of decades of structural oppression suffered by the Palestinians of Gaza since 2007, when the Israelis, on a formal level, left. They left, but they still maintain power. The siege, the control of electricity, clean drinking water, and periodic bouts of slaughter. This Gaza is a concentration camp in all but name. It's a Latter-day Indian reservation, and the Indians on the reservation decided to get off their knees and fight back. And that's how we have to understand October 7th, with all the barbarity and the brutality and the death and slaughter that ensued. I go back to what I said: no ugly oppression has ever produced a pretty resistance.
Indeed. You can call on 02. Sorry, I couldn't answer your call. 0201 277 0993 0201 465 7190 0809 597 5805. Emmanuel, you can call back now because I wanted to give other people chances. Let's talk about, so one of the things we've gotten used to, at least, is that resistance is always seen in art, in music. You know, those,
Yeah.
it has a soft power, and that soft power is what is engaging, it's embracing, it's, you know, it's educating. We only just saw Bob Geldof last weekend. Where has he been? Because when I said to people, I don't understand, where has he been? People said, oh, you know, Ireti, you're being cruel. Am I being cruel, Prof?
No. This is his intervention is welcome, given, you know, as I say, it's an all hands on deck moment, but he's 2 years too late, or he's 18 months too late. These people in the media world and the celebrity world, they look over the parapet to see if it's safe to come out. And he sees that the landscape is now safe because the cause of Palestine is now widely embraced as a cause of humanity in our time. You know, we've got the Irish rap band Kneecap. I don't know if your
Yeah,
listeners are
of
aware
course, absolutely. Yeah, we've
they've
talked about them.
created huge waves.
Yeah,
Bob Villain, another
Bob
rapper,
Villain,
a black
yeah.
rapper. He created consternation just by shouting words that are just the truth, deaf to the IDF, and the whole crowd sung along with him. You imagine the fear that would have struck in the eyes of a British establishment that's in bed with the Zionist state and the Zionist project. So culture has a massive role to play, absence of political resistance. It has had since time immemorial, the songs, language, maintaining the cultural the cultural traditions of a given people. That's the unbroken thread of a people's existence from the past to the present to the future. Bob Geldof, I wouldn't call Bob Geldof anymore a cultural figure. He's more a figure of the establishment. He took a knighthood from the Queen. I find Live Aid problematic, given that the connotation of white saviorism that was unleashed in the context of Live Aid back in '85. We just had the 10-year anniversary. They had lots of documentaries about Live Aid. And Bob Geldof is part of that, and he comes from that standpoint that our whiteness gives us much more privileges, and that we can wield those privileges on a top-down basis rather than on a basis of solidarity. But his intervention, I think, is welcome given what's going on with the Palestinians. But yeah, he's 18 months too late, and he did so out of opportunistic reasons.
Indeed. Sure. Hello. Okay, you snooze, you lose. Hello.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. You have 30 seconds.
Yeah. 30 seconds, all right. Please, why are the African countries silent about the genocide perpetrated in Gaza?
Okay.
With the exception of South Africa.
Yes.
And why is the Christian Pentecostal, the gullible, are not coming out to condemn this?
Thank you. Okay. Hello.
Hello. Good evening.
Good evening. You have 30 seconds.
Okay, great. My name is Augustus Osman. Now, upon this narrative that the Israelis that are on that land now are different from the Israelites of the Bible days. Now, the Israelites of that Bible days, where are they now?
Well, I don't know, but that's not what we're talking about. Hello. We're talking about those who are alive today. Right. I'm sorry, I had to cut that off. I mean, I can't keep asking. We've only been educating on this show for the last 2 years. I don't know where they are. Right, Prof, very quickly. So the previous caller said African, excuse me, he said, why are African countries so silent? And he also said, why are Pentecostal Christians so silent about what's going on in Gaza? I'm going to give you a minute. I'll try and sneak in another call if possible.
Well, Christian Zionism has long cultural roots all over the West. If you look at the early proto-Zionists, Christian Zionists, they believed in the prophecies of the Old Testament, especially vis-a-vis the role of the Jewish people in Christ and the building the Second Temple. And Africa is a deeply religious continent on a Christian basis, largely. And I believe that maybe a lot of Africans, you would know better than me, of course, being there and being African yourself. But Africa strikes me as a continent that's starting to wake up. And when it does wake up fully, then it will shake the world. It will be the wind that shakes the barley. That process is still ongoing. Africa is striding forward, taking its rightful place in human affairs. But that process is far from complete. And so maybe there's an insularity as a consequence of that and as part of that process. But, I think when Africa does wake up fully from its colonial slumber, as it were, then things will really change at a rapid rate of knots. And I look forward to that day. It can't come soon enough.
Soon enough. Okay. We've got 2 minutes left. They're already screaming in my ear. What I'm going to say is, Prof, finally, what would you say to young people across Africa and the developing world who are watching this genocide? What lessons must we, I say we, I like to pretend I'm young. What lessons must we draw from Gaza, and what moral responsibility do we all share in ending the bleeding? If you can do that in 1 minute, they're screaming at me.
Well, a great figure of human history is, of course, Karl Marx. And he said that his favourite word of all in English language, and that will have its African equivalent, and whatever African tongue it is, his favourite word is defiance. And Oscar Wilde, the great Irish playwright, writer, and wit, his favourite word was disobedience. He said disobedience is the finest virtue in the human condition, and I concur completely. Never find yourself on the side of the powerful in matters of the power, matters of the state. Always side with the underdog. Always be on the side of those who are resisting power. Never be an accessory to cruelty or anything to do with putting your foot on another man or woman's neck. And if you can keep those values in your heart, then you won't go far wrong in terms of your human development. May cost you financially, career-wise, but what is our purpose on this earth? Is it just to make money and be selfish and greedy and to go along to get along? All the great Africans had that defiant streak in them, all the way back. Nkrumah and Mandela, they had that defiant. Lumumba, they were defiant people. They stood up regardless of what the stakes were, regardless of the enormity of the opposition. They stood up for something, and as Malcolm X famously said, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
Indeed.
So make sure you stand for what's good in this world, which is resistance to oppression, colonialism, in all its forms.
Apparently, I'm being given an extra couple of minutes, right? Okay, because of the popularity of your voice, Prof. So you can call now. I'll answer your call. Sorry, 0201 2770993, 0201 4657190. And you can still send your message to WhatsApp 0809 597 5805. I'm coming to your calls now. Make it short, sharp, and succinct. Hello.
Once again, this is okay.
Go ahead, Emmanuel.
What should the UN do today? Because the IDF now is shifting the blame of the starvation in Gaza, to the UN, that they are not bringing aid into Gaza, when we know, when everybody knows that they are the ones responsible, for stopping of aid. Should the UN pull out of everything till there is a ceasefire before they come in, because they can't bring journalists today.
I got it.
Because journalists are not allowed into Gaza, so there's no conspiracy in there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right. What Emmanuel is saying is, what should the UN do now? Because the IDF are now saying it's the UN that's not bringing in the aid, and the UN has made it clear, and we all know that the IDF are lying. Should the UN pretty much go on strike? But I think, wouldn't that be counterproductive?
The UN has been undermined and violated. The UN Charter has been ripped up and all but name. The UN Charter, was drawn up and established in 1948 in order to govern the post-war world under a supposed set of laws that bind every nation. That's obviously not true. Might is right. The ethos by which the world operates has been since time immemorial. What the UN should do is continue to do what's doing, is making these moral arguments against what's going on in Gaza. It doesn't have the military. It doesn't have the capacity to put together a military coalition. I wish it did, in order to intervene. The real question is what goes on in the White House and the Oval Office when it comes to what's going on in Gaza. Donald Trump could end this slaughter with one phone call. One phone call.
Yeah.
He could end this. We know that. He chooses not to because he's a white supremacist. And for him, Palestinians, brown and black people in general, belong at the bottom of that racial hierarchy that I mentioned, while Western-eyed Israeli Jews belong at the top along Westerners. That's the state of the world we live in. The UN has been reduced to a spectator at the Roman Colosseum, watching the slaves being ripped apart for the delectation of the Roman masses. And it's a terrible thing, The UN will hardly recover from this. The UN General Assembly is made up of the right-thinking nations of the world that have recognised Palestine, that have delegitimized Israel and vote after vote after vote after vote over many, many years. But we're hamstrung by the 6 members of the Permanent Security Council. These are the colonial powers. And that structure was established with that in mind, that it is might is right, masquerading as democracy. And here's the thing. We have many leaders in modern history who've gone after countries for the supposed lack of democracy in Iraq, Saddam, Libya under Gaddafi. The real problem we have is the lack of democracy between states, not in states, between states.
Yeah.
But the old world is dying. We talk about Africa. Ibrahim Traore is doing some great things. I think Pan-Africanism is an idea whose time has come. It's never died, the idea of Pan-Africanism. And I think, as I say, when Africa wakes up, then the whole world will wake up with it. But the UN has been violated and undermined to the nth degree certainly by this Trump administration in particular.
Thank you so much, Professor John Wight. I told you, when we get a Scotsman on the show, they don't negotiate. Don't ever get them confused with English people. Totally different. Thank you so much, John. Thank you, Prof. We want you to come back. It's been an incredibly educative show. Thank you.
Anytime. Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Have a wonderful weekend.
Likewise. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
How do we make our cooking come alive? For that tasty meal.
99.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria